The keys felt heavy in my hand as I watched my brother Mark storm out of the coffee shop, leaving his untouched latte growing cold on the table between us. The morning sun caught the brass, making it gleam like a bitter reminder of what could have been. I had just offered him the keys to the Victorian house he dreamed about since we were kids, the one with the wraparound porch and dormer windows on Cedar Street. "Keep your charity," he'd spat, his face twisted with a familiar pride that had always been his downfall. "I don't need your handouts." I sat there, letting the morning crowd's chatter wash over me, thinking about how we got here. 10 years ago, we were just two kids sharing a cramped bedroom in our parents' modest home. Mark was the dreamer, always talking about the houses he'd design one day. I was the quiet one, the one who listened and planned. While Mark went to architecture school, racking up student loans, and spending summers sketching dream homes, I took a different path. I started small, buying and flipping rundown properties while working 2 jobs. Every penny I saved went into real estate courses and investment strategies. Mark used to laugh at me, calling me the penny pincher, while he lived the college life. "You'll never get anywhere thinking so small," he'd say, showing me his elaborate designs for luxury homes. But I kept going, property by property, deal by deal. Now at 32, I owned one of the fastest-growing real estate development companies in the city. Mark, at 29, was struggling to keep his small architecture firm afloat, too proud to admit he needed help, too stubborn to see that his artistic vision needed a practical foundation. The barista called out another order, snapping me back to the present. I picked up the keys and slid them into my pocket. The house on Cedar Street would sit empty for now, but I knew Mark would need it sooner than he thought. His firm was bleeding money, taking on ambitious projects without the capital to back them up. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, my assistant. "Thompson deal closed. We own the Riverside property." I smiled, remembering Mark's reaction when I'd first mentioned buying the old industrial area by the river. "Waste of money," he'd said. "That area's dead." But I saw what he couldn't, the potential beneath the decay. While he dreamed of single luxury homes, I was planning entire communities. The coffee shop door chimed as I left, stepping into the crisp autumn air. My office was just 2 blocks away, in one of the first buildings I had renovated. The lobby still made me pause every morning. Marble floors, Art Deco details restored to their original glory, but with modern touches that made it feel alive. "Good morning, Miss Carter." The security guard nodded as I passed. My office on the top floor offered a view of the city skyline, a skyline I was slowly reshaping. The Riverside property would be my biggest project yet. Affordable housing mixed with retail spaces, green areas, and community centers. The kind of development that could transform an entire neighborhood. Sarah met me at my desk, tablet in hand. "Your brother's firm just lost the Westbrook contract," she said quietly. I nodded, unsurprised. The Westbrook project was too big for Mark's small firm, a luxury apartment complex that required more capital than he had. He'd been counting on it to save his business. "Keep an eye on the situation," I told her, "and make sure the Cedar Street house is ready." She gave me a knowing look. Sarah had been with me since the beginning, watching the complicated dance between my success and Mark's struggle. "He'll come around," she said softly. "No," I replied, looking out at the city. "He'll crash first, and I'll be there to pick up the pieces." The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, site visits, and contract negotiations. I was finalizing plans for the Riverside development while watching Mark's firm implode from afar. He'd taken out high-interest loans to keep his business afloat, securing them against his own house, a modest place he'd bought in better times. One rainy Tuesday, Sarah walked in with the news I'd been expecting. Mark's firm filed for bankruptcy this morning. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of sadness and resignation. And the house? Bank's foreclosing. He has 30 days. I pulled out my phone, looking at the last text Mark had sent me weeks ago after our coffee shop meeting. I don't need your pity. I'll succeed on my own terms. Pride. Always pride. That evening, I drove past his office. The lights were still on, and I could see him through the window, sitting alone at his desk, surrounded by his beautiful, impractical designs. I wanted to go in to tell him it wasn't too late, that the keys to his dream house were still in my desk drawer. But I knew him. Knew he had to hit bottom before he'd accept help. So I drove home to my penthouse apartment, the one I'd bought after my first major development success. The living room walls were covered with framed photographs of my projects, before and after shots that told the story of transformation. Empty lots turned into thriving communities, abandoned buildings restored to life. There was one frame that held something different, a childish drawing Mark had given me on my 16th birthday. It showed a huge house with a wraparound porch, dormer windows, and a note in his messy handwriting. One day, sis, we'll build amazing things together. I poured myself a glass of wine and walked to the window. The city lights sparkled below, each one representing a story, a life, a possibility. Somewhere out there, Mark was facing the ruins of his dreams, too proud to reach out, too stubborn to see that success doesn't have to be solitary. My phone rang, Mom's number flashing on screen. "Have you heard?" she asked without preamble. "Yes. He won't listen to anyone. Won't accept help. You know how he is." I did know. Better than anyone. "The house is ready," I said quietly. "The Victorian? You still have it?" "Always did. Always will." Mom sighed. "He's going to lose everything." "No," I corrected her. "He's going to learn something." The next few weeks were painful to watch. Mark's firm dissolved completely. His employees, all 3 of them, found other jobs. The bank seized his house, and his car was repossessed. His girlfriend of 2 years left, tired of his refusal to accept reality. I kept tabs on him through Mom, who called daily with updates. He was sleeping on a friend's couch, still sending out proposals for projects he couldn't possibly handle, still clinging to his pride like a drowning man to a broken life raft. Then came the morning I'd been waiting for. Sarah walked into my office, her face serious. "Your brother's downstairs." I looked at my desk drawer where the keys still waited. "How does he look?" "Broken," she said simply. "Send him up in 10 minutes." After she left, I walked to the window, remembering all the times Mark had dismissed my success as lucky breaks or selling out. How he'd refused to see that my practical approach to development could have complemented his artistic vision perfectly. The door opened, and I turned to face my brother. The man who stood there was a shadow of his former self. His clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes hollow with defeat. But what struck me most was the absence of that familiar pride in his stance. "I lost everything," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, walking to my desk. "Sit down, Mark." He sank into the chair, looking around my office with new eyes. No longer dismissive, but really seeing it for the first time. "Your Riverside project," he said suddenly. "I saw the plans in the paper. It's amazing." I pulled out the drawer and took out the keys. It could be better. He stared at the keys, recognition flickering in his eyes. The Victorian? Still yours, if you want it. I can't. I don't deserve. I cut him off. This isn't about deserve. It's about choice. Choice? Yes, you can choose to keep fighting alone, or you can choose to build something better, with me. I spread out the Riverside development plans on my desk. These buildings need an architect, someone with vision, someone who can see beauty where others see just function. He leaned forward, his designer's eye automatically drawn to the plans. These residential units, they could be more organic, flow better with the landscape. Show me, I said, pushing a pencil toward him. His hand shook as he picked it up, but when it touched the paper, something of the old Mark returned. He sketched quickly, confidently, turning my practical layouts into something more fluid, more alive. We could integrate green spaces here, he murmured. Make it feel less urban, more natural, I finished. Like a community should. He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my brother. Really saw him. Not the proud, stubborn man who'd rejected my help, but the boy who'd drawn dream houses and believed we'd build amazing things together. I'm sorry, he whispered, for everything. I pushed the keys across the desk. These are still yours, but they're not just for a house anymore. They're for a partnership, if you want it. He picked up the keys, their brass surface catching the morning light, just as they had in the coffee shop months ago. But this time, instead of throwing them back, he held them tight. I choose, he said softly, to build something better. 6 months later, the Riverside development was taking shape, transforming from blueprints to reality. Mark's design influence had turned what could have been just another housing project into something extraordinary. The buildings seemed to grow organically from the landscape, their curves and angles creating harmony rather than harsh urban lines. I stood at the construction site, watching workers pour foundations for what would become the community center. Mark was a few yards away, gesturing animatedly to a group of contractors, explaining his vision for the rooftop garden system that would connect all the buildings. Your brother's different, Sarah remarked, standing beside me with her ever-present tablet. More grounded. She was right. The past 6 months had changed Mark in ways I hadn't expected. Living in the Victorian house hadn't made him complacent. It had given him the security to take risks that actually made sense. He'd thrown himself into learning the business side of development, spending evenings studying financial reports and zoning laws. The latest cost projections, Sarah said, handing me the tablet. Mark's design changes actually reduced our material costs by 15%. I smiled, remembering how he used to dismiss budget concerns as limiting creativity. Now he was finding ways to make beauty cost-effective. Miss Carter. A voice called out. It was Jason, one of the project managers, jogging toward us with a concerned look. We got a situation with the East Foundation. You might want to see this. Mark joined us as we walked to the site. The excavation had revealed an unexpected problem. Old industrial waste that would need to be cleared before we could proceed. This could set us back weeks, Jason said, running calculations on his phone. Maybe months. I watched Mark's face, waiting for the old frustration, the quick surrender to obstacles that had characterized his previous ventures. Instead, he knelt by the excavation, studying the problem. What if, he said slowly, we turn this into an opportunity? Over the next hour, he sketched out a modification to the original plan. The contaminated area would become an environmental demonstration project, a visible transformation from industrial waste to green space that would tell the story of the neighborhood's renewal. It'll add to costs, he admitted, but think of the community impact, the educational value. I looked at his drawings, seeing not just beauty, but practicality. Write up the proposal, I said. Full cost-benefit analysis. He nodded, already pulling out his tablet to start working. No argument, no defensive pride, just focused determination. Later that evening, I visited him at the Victorian house. He'd restored it beautifully, keeping its historic character while modernizing the essentials. His drafting table sat in the bay window, covered with sketches for the Riverside project. Remember when we used to share that tiny desk in our old room? He asked, handing me a cup of coffee. You always took up more than your share, I laughed. Because my drawings were bigger than your homework. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, the same colors he'd incorporated into the Riverside building's design. I was thinking, he said carefully, about opening a small design studio. Nothing like before, just me, working on residential projects alongside our development work. I noticed the hour, how naturally it came now. The Riverside projects made me realize there's a market for affordable homes that don't sacrifice design, he continued. People deserve beauty in their lives, not just functionality. Use the garden level of the Victorian, I suggested. Perfect location, and you already own it. He grinned. That's what I was thinking. Small overhead, controlled growth. The transformation in his approach was remarkable. The old Mark would have immediately leased an expensive office, hired staff he couldn't afford, tried to compete with established firms. This Mark was building slowly, sustainably. I got a call from Trevor today, he said, referring to his former girlfriend. She saw the Riverside project renderings in the Business Journal. And she suggested lunch. To catch up. He made air quotes with his fingers. Are you going? He shook his head. Some bridges should stay burned. Besides, I'm having lunch with the community council tomorrow. They want to discuss incorporating local art into the project. I studied my brother's profile in the fading light. The desperate pride was gone, replaced by something better. Quiet confidence. The next few weeks brought new challenges. A supplier went bankrupt, threatening our timeline. Mark worked through several nights, finding alternative sources, reworking designs to accommodate different materials without compromising his vision. It's actually better this way, he explained during our weekly project meeting. The new supplier uses more sustainable practices, and their materials have a smaller carbon footprint. Sarah raised an eyebrow at me behind his back, another example of how he turned a potential crisis into an improvement. The local press had started taking notice. Revolutionary design meets community needs. Read one headline. Mark did the interviews, articulate and passionate about the project's vision, always crediting our partnership for its success. One morning, I arrived at the office to find him already there, surrounded by new sketches. I couldn't sleep, he explained. Had an idea for the community center's children's area. The drawings showed a space that seemed to flow between indoor and outdoor areas, with reading nooks, art spaces, and natural play areas. It's beautiful, I said. But what about the budget? He pulled out a spreadsheet, actual numbers, carefully calculated. Already figured it out. We can offset the costs by simplifying some of the administrative areas. The community impact will be worth it. I remembered the brother who used to dismiss budgets as beneath his artistic concerns. Now he was mastering the balance between vision and viability. That evening, Mom came to dinner at the Victorian. She watched Mark show us his plans for the Children's Center, her eyes bright with tears. "You too," she said, looking between us. "You finally figured it out, haven't you?" Mark caught my eye across the table. "Figured out that we're stronger together." "Yeah, took me long enough." "Took us both," I corrected. "I could have approached things differently back then." He shook his head. "I needed to fall, to really understand what matters." After Mom left, we sat on the porch like we'd done so many nights now. The Victorian's warm lights spilled onto the wraparound porch, and in the distance, we could see the construction lights at the Riverside project. "You know what I've learned?" Mark said suddenly. "Success isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about building something meaningful." I looked at my brother, really looked at him. The angry, proud man who'd thrown keys back in my face was gone. In his place was someone stronger, wiser, ready to build something better. "Speaking of building," he said, pulling out his tablet. "Wait until you see my ideas for Phase 2 of the Riverside project." 1 year into the Riverside project, success brought unexpected challenges. Our development had become a case study in urban renewal, attracting attention from investors and developers nationwide. Mark's innovative designs, combined with our community-focused approach, had created something unique. Standing in what would soon be the completed community center, I watched my brother lead a group of architecture students through the space. They'd come from his old university, the same one where he'd once been told his ideas were too impractical. "The key," he was explaining, "is understanding that sustainable design isn't just about environmental impact. It's about creating spaces that sustain communities." The students clustered around him, taking notes as he pointed out features that seamlessly blended function with beauty. The reading nooks he designed for the children's area were taking shape, organic curves creating intimate spaces within the larger room. "Ms. Carter?" One of the students approached me after the tour. "I'm interning at Morton Development. They're offering to buy the project." I wasn't surprised. Morton was one of the largest developers in the state, known for acquiring promising projects mid-completion. They'd been sending subtle signals for weeks. "Not for sale," I said firmly. "They're prepared to offer well above market value." Before I could respond, Mark joined us. "Tell Morton," he said quietly, "that some things are worth more than money." Later, in my office, Sarah brought in the latest batch of purchase offers. "Morton's not the only one interested. These numbers are significant." Mark, sketching at the conference table, looked up. "Remember when I used to think money was the only measure of success? You've come a long way from throwing keys in my face." I smiled. He winced at the memory. Those keys, they weren't just about a house, were they? They were about trust, I said, about believing in something bigger than ourselves. The Riverside project had become that something bigger. The first residents would be moving in next month. Young families, seniors, artists, small business owners. A real community, drawn by Mark's design philosophy of creating spaces that brought people together. Morton called again, Sarah interrupted. "They want to schedule a meeting." Mark and I exchanged looks. "Schedule it," I said. "It's time they understood what we're building here." The meeting was set for the following week. In the meantime, we focused on the project's final phases. The rooftop gardens were being installed, creating a green network connecting all the buildings. Mark's design had turned what could have been wasted space into community gathering areas. "Remember when you said I was thinking too small?" I asked him one evening as we walked through the nearly completed residential section. He laughed. I was the one thinking small, all those grand designs, but no understanding of how to make them real. A group of future residents was touring their units, their excited voices echoing through the halls. Mark had designed each apartment to feel unique, using angles and natural light to create spaces that felt like homes, not units in a complex. "Mr. Stevens," a woman called out to Mark. She was one of the first to sign a lease. An art teacher who'd been priced out of her old neighborhood. "The studio space is perfect. Exactly what I imagined." Mark had worked with her to design a community art space where she could teach classes. It was this attention to individual needs, this understanding of how spaces shape lives, that made our project special. The Morton meeting came too soon. Their representatives arrived in expensive suits, armed with presentations and projections. "Your project has potential," their lead negotiator began, "but with our resources, we could scale it significantly." I watched Mark as they outlined their plans. Standardized units, simplified designs, maximum profit efficiency. The old Mark might have been tempted by their talk of expanded budgets and high-profile projects. But this Mark stood up halfway through their presentation. "You don't understand what we're building here." "We understand the market," they argued. "We can triple your return on investment." "Some returns," I joined in, "can't be measured in dollars." After they left, Mark and I stood at my office window, looking out at our project, our vision made real. "They'll be back," Sarah warned, collecting the rejected offer documents. "With bigger numbers," I agreed. "Doesn't matter," Mark said firmly. "Some things aren't for sale." The next few weeks were intense as we approached completion. Mark worked tirelessly, ensuring every detail matched his vision. He'd evolved from an architect who designed buildings to someone who created communities. One morning, I found him in the community center's children's area, adjusting the angle of a reading nook. "The light needs to hit just right," he explained. "When kids sit here, I want them to feel like they're in their own special place." I remembered the brother who used to care only about how his designs looked on paper. Now he thought about how people would live in his spaces, how they would feel, how they would grow. "Morton's not wrong," he said suddenly. "We could make more money, build bigger. But this," he gestured around us, "this is what success really looks like, creating something that matters." The first residents began moving in the following week. Mark and I stood on the rooftop garden, watching families explore their new homes. Children ran along the paths between buildings. Seniors gathered in the community spaces. Artists set up easels to capture the riverside view. "We did it," I said softly. "No," Mark corrected. "We did something better. We built a community." Sarah found us there, tablet in hand as always. Final inspection reports are in. Everything exceeded expectations. "And Morton?" I asked. "They've stopped calling." She smiled. "I think they finally understand." As the sun set over the river, casting long shadows across our creation, Mark pulled out his old sketch of the Victorian house, the one he'd given me on my 16th birthday. "I used to think this was my dream," he said, looking at the childish drawing. "A single perfect house. Now I understand. Dreams grow. They evolve." "Like brothers?" I suggested. He laughed. "Like siblings who learn to build something better together." Below us, the community we created was coming to life. Lights came on in windows, voices and laughter drifted up from the courtyards, and the riverside development was no longer just a project. It was home. "Ready for phase 2? I asked. Mark grinned, already pulling out his tablet to show me new sketches. Always. But this time, let's build it right from the start. And as we planned our next project, I knew we found something better than success. We'd found purpose. 5 years later, the Riverside development had become more than just a successful project. It was a blueprint for change. Development companies from across the country sent representatives to study our model of community-focused design. But what made me proudest wasn't the professional recognition, it was watching the community thrive. On a bright spring morning, I stood with Mark on the rooftop garden of the community center, watching the neighborhood come alive below. Children hurried to the small school we'd added in Phase 2. Seniors tended the community gardens, and artists worked in their studios with doors open to passersby. Sometimes I still can't believe it, Mark said, sipping his coffee. Remember when I thought success meant designing mansions for the wealthy? I smiled, remembering the angry, proud architect who'd thrown keys back in my face. You've come a long way from that coffee shop. We both have, he replied, pulling out his tablet to show me his latest designs. Look at what I'm thinking for the new downtown project. His sketches showed another integrated community, but with lessons learned from our Riverside success. More green spaces, better flow between public and private areas, innovative solutions for mixed-income housing. What struck me most was how he'd incorporated feedback from our Riverside residents into every aspect of the design. Sarah joined us, her tablet replaced by a sleek new holographic display. The community council meeting is about to start, she reminded us. They're excited about the mentorship program. The mentorship program had been Mark's idea, pairing established residents with newcomers, architects with students, business owners with entrepreneurs. It was his way of paying forward the second chance he'd received. In the community center's main hall, residents gathered for the monthly council meeting. The art teacher who'd been one of our first residents now ran a thriving arts program. Senior citizens taught gardening classes in the rooftop spaces. Small businesses that had started in our incubator spaces were expanding. This is what success looks like, Mark whispered as we took our seats at the back of the room. Not in bank accounts, but in lives changed. After the meeting, we walked through the development together. Every corner held a story: the cafe where 2 residents had met and later married, the playground designed with input from the children themselves, the workshop spaces where craftspeople taught their trades. Morton Development called again. Sarah mentioned as we toured the newest addition, a technology center for youth. They want to partner on the downtown project. Mark and I exchanged knowing looks. Tell them what we always tell them, I said. Some things aren't for sale, Mark finished. We ended our walk at the Victorian House, still his home and now also the headquarters of his thriving design studio. The garden level had become a learning space where he taught sustainable design to aspiring architects. Sitting on the porch where we'd spent so many evenings planning and dreaming, I watched my brother sketch ideas for our next project. He'd found his balance between vision and practicality, between ambition and purpose, between success and significance. You know what I've learned, he said, looking up from his sketch. True success isn't about what you build. It's about who you become while building it. I thought about the journey we'd taken, from that moment with the keys in the coffee shop to now. We'd built something better than either of us had imagined possible, not just in bricks and mortar, but in lives transformed, including our own. Ready for the next chapter? I asked. He smiled, pulling out the old drawing of the Victorian, the one that had started it all. Always. But this time, we're not just building houses or developments. We're building hope, I finished. As the sun set over our Riverside community, casting long shadows across the spaces we created together. I realized that success had a different meaning now. It wasn't measured in dollars or square footage, but in the laughter of children in the playgrounds, in the stories shared in community spaces, in the dreams taking shape in every corner of our creation. Mark stood, gathering his sketches. Mom's coming for dinner. She loves to remind us how far we've come. From throwing keys to throwing open doors, I laughed. He hugged me, something the old Mark would never have done. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not giving up on me." As I walked home through our thriving community, I thought about how sometimes the best success stories don't end with personal triumph, but with shared victory. We hadn't just built buildings. We'd built bridges between past and future, between dreams and reality, between two siblings who'd learned that together they could create something truly extraordinary. And that was worth more than all the keys in the world.